There we go. Action.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, audience members, for bearing with us. We're going to start this from the top. I am Avonelle Wing with Double Exposure. We run the Envoy program. And Lee Broderick is here with one of our publishers, Dragon Dawn Productions. Andy, Okay, cool. I'm going to keep talking and not watch the Twitch feed. So Dragon Dawn Productions has a game on Kickstarter right now called, I'm going to get it wrong. Lee, help me.
Maeshowe.
Maeshowe. Okay. So Lee is the designer of the game and is here to talk a little bit about his process and about what it took to get this game to Kickstarter and some of the things he's really excited about. I'm going to start by shouting out that it is a 1 to 2 player game, which makes it pretty much pandemic perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah, perfect time to be launching this game, mate.
Yeah. All right. So tell us a little bit about your part in this process.
So I'm the designer of the game. I first came up with the idea, I think around 5 years ago, nearly 5 years ago, spring of 2016. A little bit of background, I suppose. I'm an archaeologist by profession.
Cool.
And in 2016, I attended an archaeology conference on the islands of Orkney. And that's somewhere that I've always wanted to go and spend time at. So, that's what I did. I booked a bed and breakfast. I drove up. I spent an extra week just driving around and exploring after the conference finished. And during that time, my partner and I, one of the places that we visited was a Neolithic tomb called Maeshowe. And this is something that she's an archaeologist as well. So she and I have heard of this place for a long time. It's in all the archaeology textbooks in the UK. It's sort of a famous big place. It's 5,000 years old. It's older than the pyramids.
Wow.
It's a stone-built structure. If you've looked at the Kickstarter page and you've seen the cover art that we have, which I think is being shown on that's the one. So that is actually what the interior of Maeshowe looks like. That is really what it is. As I say, this is a 5,000-year-old structure. And when I visited it, I was expecting to be blown away by this fantastic old architecture. And I kind of was, but I was blown away by something else as well. So many years ago, decades ago probably, I read some of the Icelandic sagas, which you may or may not have heard of, I don't know. But they were written over a period of about 600 years. And the earlier ones are really sort of myth and legend and talk about gods and monsters and dwarves and all of those kind of things. And then the later ones are more sort of real historic accounts. And the Orkneyinga saga, which deals with the lives of the Jarls of Orkney, is one of the later ones to be written. It's more or less being written contemporarily with the events that are happening. But there are still things in it that when I read it, I thought, yeah, no, that's real. That's not real. That's sort of make believe. There's a Jarl that breaks into the tomb of Maeshowe, and he comes away with incredible wealth and fortune, but he buries it because he's about to go off on crusade. And then 3 years later, there's another of the Jarls of Orkney who's traveling from one place on the island to another at Christmas time. And this storm gets up out of nowhere and visibility is really reduced and they're desperately seeking shelter. And they find what they think is a house and they go round the house and can't find a door. So in desperation, they go on top of the house and come in through the roof. And it turns out that what they've just come into is Maeshowe through the hole that the guy getting the treasure 3 years earlier had made. So suddenly they're trapped underground and they've got to dig their way out.
Right.
To survive. And this is another story. I thought, amazing story, but this is clearly made up, right?
Right.
Right. So there I am stood, to bring it back up to 5 years ago, I'm stood in the tomb of Maeshowe, and it's not the Neolithic 5,000-year-old architecture I'm marveling at, but in Maeshowe is the largest collection of runic Viking graffiti outside of Scandinavia. And some of this is written by the people that are saying, I was here with Jarl Ronvan when he found the treasure. So I'm sat there going, these stories are real, yeah? This is amazing. More people should know about these stories.
Cool.
So within a day or so, that's sort of where I first started to think, well, yeah, I'm going to design a game out of this because it's such a cool thing, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And it's kind of unique, I think, in two ways. That first of all, historical. There are loads of historical board games, but
There are.
I think almost without exception, they're about wars or famines or plagues. They're these things of sort of big suffering to swathes of people. Whereas this is a very personal, intimate survival story. So that's different. And then
Right.
the second thing that's different is, if there's a tomb in a game, what are you doing? You're breaking in and getting treasure, right?
You're riffling through things. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is exactly the opposite. You're in the tomb. You need to get out.
Interesting. Yeah, so when a topic like this comes up, we all go and Google and we all compare notes in the living room.
Mhm.
And one of the things we were really struck by is that there's no way for this to be about colonizing or stealing goods because there was nothing.
That's right. So it's, I mean, as I say, I am an archaeologist by profession, so I've drawn inspiration from that, and I've tried. Obviously, there's things that you do because they're better game mechanics. So you're not trying to create a simulation because ultimately you want people to play it and to have fun. But
Right.
it's been important to me to try and reflect accuracy to the period as much as possible. So, to give an example of that, there's a couple of cards in the game where the flavor text in the rulebook suggests that it might be the Norse gods. So the food card with the goose, for example, that it says, this might be a gift from Frigg, or it might just be a coincidence, just a hapless goose that's happened to fall in through the same hole you fell through, and you're going to make the most of it. So that's sort of left open to interpretation, I think, for both the player and the Vikings that were there at the time. You don't have to be super religious, but you're in a bit of a strange place, and you're going to take anything that's out there to help you, right? You're going to look for signs to make the world easier.
We were laughing about turning the D&D trope about finding a duck in the dungeon on its head and taking the current cultural zeitgeist around Goose and the what is it called, Untitled Goose Game.
You're
and
gonna have to
all
tell
of a
me
sudden,
more about this. I don't know about it.
There I don't want to derail us,
Sure.
but for people who understand the reference, it's kind of funny because it is actually a very beautiful, very like epically lit goose that is there to become your dinner so that you can escape this tomb.
That's right. That's right. And I know a few people, I've seen a couple of reviews, and reviewers have said, that if there's one thing that's kind of shonky with the theme, it's these geese that keep falling into the tomb, flying into the tomb. And I kind of get that seems a bit shonky, but it was something that for me was it was the most thematic way possible of having this food mechanic. Was I thought, well, according to the sagas, it took them 3 days to dig themselves out.
Wow.
You don't want to be going much longer than that without food, right? So one of the mechanics that sort of lends a level of interest in the game is managing your food resource. So there needs to be a way of introducing food into the game. And nobody's sort of walking past and dropping down barley or bread to you, because if they did, why wouldn't they drop a rope down to you, right? It would be a lot easier.
Right.
One of the artists said to me when we were discussing the food card, and I told him it was going to be a goose, he said, well, I thought maybe it would be better as a rat because this is a gritty dungeon. And I said, well, I know what you're saying. And again, that sort of game of cliches, isn't it? If you're in a dungeon, then you eat a rat. Archaeologically, historically, there were no rats in Orkney at this time. So we can rule that out straight away.
Right.
What we do know then and now is there are a lot of geese there. They're a pest. There are licenses for the farmers to go out and kill them for most of the year. There are a lot of geese. So, okay, it's not likely, but to me it seemed possible at least that if there's a snowstorm and there's geese flapping around, then one of them might come through the same hole you fell down. It's not beyond the realms of possibility, right?
Right. And you've fallen down a hole into a pit in the ground. It's kind of a surreal situation to find yourself in.
Yeah. Again, the likely has already gone out of this situation, hasn't it?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm really intrigued by the fact that it is a 1 or 2 player game. Talk to me a little bit about why that was your choice and a little bit about the development of the solo version.
Yeah, sure. So it actually started with the solo version. I play a lot of solo games myself. As a child, I used to play a couple of different versions of Patience. So I think called Solitaire in America, Card Solitaire. Yeah. Both of them introduced to me by my mum. She told me the rules to them, and I played them. I continue to play them sometimes throughout my life. And the last 10 years or so, more modern board games, I play solo a lot. That's still the main way I play. When I was first starting to develop the rules for Maeshowe, there was a solo print and play contest being held on Board Game Geek.
Oh, cool.
So that was what I first started developing it for. And that was the early summer 2016, so 4.5 years ago now. At the end of that contest, the end of that summer, I did put out Maeshowe as a print and play game on Board Game Geek. So it's been available there now for 4 years. This has been developed a lot since then. It has been re-implemented with the full title now of Maeshowe and Orkney Saga. And as part of that development process, we've done a lot of streamlining. It's a vastly improved game over what that was, I think. But we've also introduced the 2-player co-op mode, which was something I had an idea for not long after doing that solo print and play contest. But at the time, I had no need to go back to it and add that in because it was a project that I'd finished. And then 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, Dragon Dawn Productions were publishing another of my games through Kickstarter, Dwarf. And once that campaign finished, I think, or maybe even before, they said to me that they'd be interested in picking this up for publication as well. So that would have been when it first went into really sort of serious development, and I had a developer appointed to the project about a year ago. And that I said to him then, this is the rules I thought of for making it into a 2-player co-op game. So that became part of the development process from there to make sure that I think it was important to me that if we were including those rules, that it did work as a 2-player game.
Right.
I think of something like, say, the Oniverse games, where they might say 1 to 2 players on the box, but we all know really they're a solo game, and the 2-player experience isn't quite the same. Things like Onirim and Castellion, Sylvion, those kind of games. Right.
And there is as a co-op game, there's always the risk that it ends up being 2-player solitaire. So
that's right. So what we did in this, there's actually just 2 different ways of playing 2-player co-op in this game. One is the original idea that I had, and one is an alternative that the developer came up with.
Okay, tell me a little bit about those.
So the main 2-player co-op version that's in the game, in the solo game, you have a hand of 5 cards, and on each turn, you play a card and you discard a card. Mm-hmm. So that's fairly straightforward. In between that, you're managing your health resource and your food resource.
Right.
In the 2-player game, you both have a separate hand of cards. You share the same play area. You share the same discard pile. You share the same food resource. You each have separate health resources.
Okay.
And you have 1 extra option on your turn. So instead of playing and discarding a card, if you're in possession of the Jarl token, which is, think of it like a first player marker.
Right.
If you're in possession of that token, instead of playing and discarding a card, you can choose to pass that marker to the other player. So you get the power to skip a go if it helps. If you've been looking at the cards you played and you said, we really need to play this card and my partner's got it, but I don't, then you can skip your go and let them do that.
Okay.
But then you can't skip another go until they've skipped a go.
Right. That makes sense.
So it's a really simple idea, but I haven't really seen it in any other co-op game. This sort of idea of, we've got to think and work together. We can't just keep playing cards from our hands. There's this extra little decision there that's sort of timing based and planning ahead based. There's a strategic element there, and when I choose to skip.
Right. That makes a lot of sense and makes it definitely, you have to collaborate on the thinking that through.
That's right. The alternative variant that the developer came up with has the two players operating in complete silence. You're not allowed to talk to each other.
Oh.
And in that variant, you still play a card on every turn that you have, but you have the option, instead of discarding a card, to pass a card to the other player. They then have to discard down to 5 cards, so they've still got a hand of 5. But so that's sort of a different way of communicating with each other rather than just talking.
Oh, interesting. It kind of builds on that the no speaking element of the mind, but adds you could screw up your partner's hand by making them discard something they really need.
Yeah, it's always a possibility. It's the fear of the dark variant, he calls it. The developer calls it.
Oh, cool. So one of our audience members says, how do you feel about releasing a game about being trapped while we're all trapped due to the pandemic? Was that just a coincidence?
That's definitely a coincidence. I mean, like I say, the initial idea for the game came out nearly 5 years ago. It's been available as a print and play, or its predecessor, I should say, has been available as a print and play for nearly 4 years before going through this development phase. Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. The current situation we're all in.
So, talk to me a little bit about the experience of working with a developer. How did that, like, as a designer, as somebody who has a very deep connection to the content and to the process, adding another person, what was that like?
I can understand that there's a lot of designers get a bit precious about their baby.
Right.
But quite honestly, it was something that I was always very keen to do. I don't think I'm prideful or precious enough to say, no, this game is perfect the way it is. Don't do anything to it. I was always aware that there were some flaws, and I had some difficulty in ironing out some of those creases, because especially something that started out as a solo game, you do most of the playtesting yourself, right? And you ask other people to play test it for you, and they might write something up and send it back to you, but it's not the same as being at a board game convention or being somewhere else where you can see a table of 4 people playing your game and how they interact and all of those kind of things.
Right.
So it's a very different development process from that point of view. And especially as the designer, you sort of get attached to certain things, and you get hung up on certain things that you shouldn't. And I'm very much of the opinion, I think you'll hear some people say, oh, I just wanted to create the perfect game for me. And sorry, that's a load of rubbish. It is, because one, we all know there's no such thing as the perfect game. So even if you were creating the perfect game for you, you'd be designing it forever. You'd never actually finish designing it.
Right, because you learn new things about games and about yourself, hopefully.
Exactly. So that's so we can shoot that down straight away. And the second thing, I think, is if you're creating something that is almost ideal for you, exactly what you want, then I think that's brilliant. And it's brilliant to put it out there as a print and play game like I did, that other people can download and play if they want to. But if you're asking somebody to pay money for something, then it's got to be more than just for you. It's got to be for all the other people that buy the game.
Right.
And at that point, I think it becomes even more valuable to have other people's opinions, other people's eyes look at something and say, well, I can see what you're trying to do there, but have you thought about this? So working with a developer was something I always wanted to do for this game. And the relationship that we built up is fantastic. When he was first appointed, he emailed me and said, okay, what do you want me to look at? And I didn't reply to him. 3 weeks later, he was in another email and said, okay, I've played the game, and the areas that I think that could be improved are this, this, and this. And I thought, fantastic. Those are exactly the areas that I thought of. But I wanted to see that we were both on the same page. There's no point in me saying, I think you should work on these things, if he then thought, well, actually, I think these things are a bigger concern, right?
Right.
So that was sort of a validation point at that point, that we both saw the same strengths and weaknesses in the game, and we could work on the same things together. And we now have 2 pairs of eyes to tackle problems.
Did the game surprise you in any way during that process? Did you learn anything about the game that you didn't know before? Did anything get uncovered?
Yeah, and I think not just about the game, but sort of different areas of game design as well. So, for example, the card deck, the core card deck between the print and play game and the re-implemented game, Maeshowe and Orkney Saga, has shrunk from 54 cards to 36. And that sounds like it's going to be a much tighter, more restrictive design environment, which isn't true. It's a much tighter gameplay experience, which is something that we wanted. Right. But it actually opens up more space for design around the edges. So inside the game box, now that we've hit a load of stretch goals on the Kickstarter campaign, we've got 6 different expansions shipping in the box for every game. Those expansions are quite small. They're only 3 cards. But if you're adding 3 cards to a 36 card deck, that's making a big impact. That's nearly 10% of the deck. So it actually creates up a lot of interesting design space there that you know these cards are going to have an impact. They're not just ones that you're shoving in and you might see them, you might not. Who knows, really? That they are going to be there. You are going to see them. They are going to have an impact and shape the way that the game's played. So using those 6 different expansions, either individually or in combination, really does open up a wildly different gameplay experiences. So that was something that I took from that I wasn't expecting necessarily to see the restriction of something actually opening up new design spaces.
I had not actually scrolled through the stretch goals. I'm really fascinated by that 3-card expansion concept. What do the expansion cards add?
So there's 3. There were 3 different expansions in the box from day one, and that went out in the prototype copies to all of the reviewers. And we've added 3 more, so there's now 6. And each of them plays with one of the core mechanisms in the game in a different way. So I talked about food resource, health resource. There's the discard mode. When you discard a card in the game, it's not just discarding it and it's out of the game. There's often, especially if it's a card that might be negative to play, there's usually a negative effect to discarding it as well.
Okay.
So that's something else that we need to play with, that discard pile. And then there's the row of cards that you play too. And then the third main sort of design space in the game is the runes, which are like a card suit. So they work in a couple of different ways in the core game, including that if you have a hand of matching runes, then you go mad. And that means that you have to shuffle your hand back into the discard pile back into the draw pile, and you lose 1 health permanently.
Okay.
Which sounds terrible, and it kind of is terrible.
Especially since you only have 3 days to escape.
Right. But that's also helping you blow off a bit of steam in the way that we all need to every now and then, right? The pressure's got too much, blow off a bit of steam, kick a few rocks around, calm down,
yell at a goose.
Again. That's the only way to get the discard pile back into your draw deck.
Okay.
So you will die in the game, you'll lose the game, either if you run out of health or your draw deck runs out. So going mad, actually, although it sounds terrible and is kind of terrible, also has this very necessary part of the game, where it's the only way to get those discard cards back.
Right. That's interesting.
So that's another design space that we play around with, making more use of those rune symbols, more use of the discard pile of the row, more use of the food for the resources, the way that all these different aspects sort of interact and mesh. And each expansion plays on a different one of those. And they generally have 2 sort of more negative cards and 1 very positive card. And again, they'll both play with the same mechanism and sort of balance each other out, but you can combine them in a certain way, use one to set up the other.
Interesting. Okay. So talk a little bit about how gameplay in the core set happens.
So gameplay in the core set, like I say, on your turn, you've got to play a card and discard a card. Discarding a card may come with a bad effect if it's a negative card, but what you're trying to aim to do is to build up a set of 4 excavate passage cards. So there's sort of a set collection aspect to the game there as well. If you can get 4 excavate passage cards to the row in a row, making a set of 4, then you can remove one of the passage tokens. And to win the game, you need to remove all of the passage tokens.
Okay.
If the 4 Excavate Passage cards have a matching rune symbol, which I said is like a card suit, then you can remove 2 passage tokens. So you're being twice as efficient there.
Right.
So that's the core gameplay there. You're managing your health and your food. You're playing cards to the road, discarding cards, and trying to remove these passage tokens from the board to make it out alive and make sure that the sagas get written.
Right. And we don't know anything about this if you don't escape.
That's right.
What is your win ratio? How often do you win versus how often do you lose? You personally.
Yeah, me personally, I'm going to say I probably win 70 to 80% of the time. But there's a real difficulty scaling in the game. So we recommend that on easy, you start with just 3 passage tokens to remove from the game board. And you can scale that right up to 7, which is absolutely impossible unless you make use of the mini expansions, you cycle through the deck going mad a few times, and really sort of work out the ins and outs and make the most use of that deck. And even then, there will be times you lose because, of course, it's a small deck of cards, and that's an element of randomness that, we can't always mitigate against. But once you know what you're doing, you should be able to win most of the time, or let's say 70, 80% of the time.
What was the process of working with your artist, your graphic designer like? Because it has sort of a despairing and bleak feel to it. And like you said, the art on the front of the cover is very specific. How did you go about capturing that with your artist?
So I should say we've got 2 artists as well as a graphic designer.
Okay.
So the artist for the game box is Lars Monk, who also did the art for my previous game, Dwarf. And I was really impressed with Lars's art during that game. I thought he did a fantastic job. But it was the feeling of the game was much happier.
Right.
Yeah, it was very thinly themed. Basically, you're a dwarf. You're in the mountains doing the things that dwarves do. You mine and do all of those kind of things. And Lars also has a great deal of experience of illustrating children's books, so that worked. When the publisher suggested to me that he should be the artist for this game, I said, I don't know. I don't think he's up to it. But we had a conversation, and I sent him the files for the game at that point. And he replied to me, and he referenced a film, which I've never seen and can't remember the title of now, in his reply to me. But the thing that stood out to me was he said, I get it. You're looking for a very existential atmosphere. And I said, yes, that's exactly the word. So he got it straight away, and that was great. Later on, Lars was busy with some other projects, and we started to realize he wasn't going to be able to do all of the art for the game. So we brought Matthias Katrien on board, who is probably most famous, I think, for the art in Dominion.
Okay.
And again, so that was a bit more backwards and forwards. We went through several different versions of some of the cards before we reached the point where I think he really understood the tone of the game, and say that sort of existential dread.
Right.
And he's done a really good job in the end as well, I think. And the fact that you don't immediately know that there's 2 artists in the game is just what I want to hear, because there's nothing worse for me in a game than you sit there with 2 cards and you go, well, these are plainly 2 different artists with 2 different visions, and they just don't work together.
Right.
So maybe if you know there's 2 artists, you can see that where one's done some and one's done the others, but the fact you don't see it straight away is a really good thing. And that helping to tie them together is the graphic design. And Mark has done a really good job of that, of tying the arts together with the symbols as well, which obviously are there to make the game language independent. But they're fairly clear, and that's working really well.
The pictograms are super clear.
Yeah, he's done a really good job on that.
Cool. I wouldn't have known that there were 2 separate artists just flipping through the deck. So good job, team.
Absolutely. I will say that the cards are going to be slightly brighter, not necessarily lighter, but slightly brighter and with more contrast than the copy that you've got there.
Right.
They're too dark there. Some of the pictures you can't really see clearly. So we're fixing that for the full print run.
That makes sense.
Hopefully they'll look a bit more like the ones on the Kickstarter page, I think.
Right. So the process of kickstarting and building a community, what have you learned about that process? What is there anything that you would share to somebody else getting ready to start down that path?
I think if you're good on social media, which I'm not at all, then that's a big start. So this is obviously, this Dragon Dawn Productions is, I don't know, 11th Kickstarter campaign, of which it's the second game that I've been the designer for. And yeah, we've learned things slower than we should over that time. The main thing I think is to be prepared, and you need to be engaged with communities on social media in particular. You need to be in normal times, the before times, going to conventions and engaging with people, and getting your game out there as well, so that people can say, "Oh, I remember playing a demo of that at this convention, a year ago, 2 years ago," and it sticks in their mind, and just really helping to build that up. And then again, sort of at least 2 months before you're due to launch your Kickstarter, get the prototype comic copies printed and sent out to previewers, and let them talk about it as well with the people that follow them, and get their videos up and continue to build hype so that when you actually launch, you're there. And if you can fund fairly early on, then that helps to build momentum and you'll keep going. And I think for me, that's been the biggest difference between Maeshowe and Orkney Saga and Dwarf, my previous game. That we funded Dwarf, I think, in the first 48 hours, which was great. But for Maeshowe and Orkney Saga, it took 48 minutes. And we've really just seen the momentum build and build and build and keep going from there. So that's been a light and day thing there. And I do think the Kickstarter page is prettier. That helps.
Right.
Because trying to set up a Kickstarter page from the creator point of view is awful, frankly. They don't like giving you the tools to make it look nice. So that helps. And as I say, just getting the review copies out in plenty of time beforehand, and that people know it's coming. Those are the two big things to do.
That makes a lot of sense. Is there a digital implementation of the game where people might be able to preview it by playing it electronically?
I don't think there is.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember. I feel like it's in the works on Tabletopia, maybe, but I don't think it's actually out there yet.
So maybe people can just keep an eye on the Dragon Dawn Productions social media.
Yeah, of course, we'll put it out there as soon as it's ready.
Awesome. All right, so talk to me about where you are, what are you hoping for from the game? Who are you hoping to reach?
Obviously, the solo games community is one that's really sort of grown in recent years, and we joked earlier that it's the perfect time to launch a game like this.
Yeah.
And I think also from that point of view, couples as well. There aren't that many 2-player co-op games, I don't think, that really work as a 2-player co-op. I mean, obviously, any co-op you can play at 2 players and they work just fine, and any co-op you can play solo and it works just fine, more or less.
Right.
But to have one that is specifically, it's a small footprint, it works just for 1 to 2 players. Setup is a minute, it's minimal. Tear down equally, no time at all. And a game will take 15 to 30 minutes. So for a solo gamer or a couple that has half an hour to kill in the evening, kids are gone to bed or whatever it is, then that's your slot. That's where this is going to fit in.
Right. I like the fact that it's language independent too, that everything, you don't have to decipher a card. You don't have to guess what something means. It's very straightforward.
Yeah, and I think that's important to the publisher as well. I mean, Dragon Dawn Productions is a fairly unique structure of a company. It was founded by a couple in Finland, but they operate it as a collective, basically. So at any time, I think there's between 30 and 50 people associated with it, varying levels of involvement in it, but they're spread all over the world as well. There's people in America, people in Australia, myself obviously, and a couple of other people in the UK, the people in Germany, Spain, the Czech Republic, and we communicate mainly through Discord these days. It was Slack once,
right?
But yeah, so we all collaborate using Discord and Google Docs and work together and involve ourselves in tasks as we can do them. So it might be design, it might be play testing, it might be, you know, sort of other aspects of that, or it could be communications. I've done a lot of that, or there's graphic design and GIFs and creating the Kickstarter pages and all of these things. And it's a big community project, basically. You know, if the games make lots of money, then we'll be entitled to a share of the profits. But so far that hasn't happened, and we'll get a copy of the game, and that's it. So it's something that we will do because we enjoy doing it.
Right. So do you have another game bumping around in the back of your head? Is there something next?
Loads. I've got a computer folder with subfolders in it and little titles of this game and this game and sort of mechanisms and themes, and there's always things going on. Yeah, there's another small game like the two that I published so far that I'll probably escalate the development of once this Kickstarter's over. There's a big game that I asked the developer for Maeshowe and Orkney Saga to be a co-designer on, so we'll be working on that together going forwards. And I'm also working on the solo rules for Singularity Sky, which is a big space epic game coming out. I think that's up to 6 players, maybe. I might be wrong. That's a big game coming out onto Kickstarter in the 4th quarter of this year, which is, again, a re-implementation of an earlier game called Phantom League, which was based on the computer game Elite itself. And it's been rethemed to Charles Stross's book series of the same name, Singularity Sky. So there's a lot going on.
A divergence from your drawing from archaeology, for sure.
Absolutely. It would be boring if we did the same thing the whole time.
All right, what have you played recently that you didn't design that really moved you?
The last few days, I've been playing a lot of games of Ginkgopolis because the reprint of that is finally delivered to me.
Cool.
I've been enjoying that a lot. Other games this year, new games that I've been enjoying a lot would be Hallertau, the new Rosenberg game.
Okay.
I also played through a full campaign of a game most people probably haven't heard of, which is Darksiders: The Forbidden Land.
I've never heard of it.
You've never heard of it? I didn't expect you to. So that was based on the Darksiders video game series. And it's a dungeon crawling type game. It shipped in April last year, I think, as part of a limited edition version of the video game, which is why I think most board gamers haven't heard of it, even though limited edition means something very different in video games to what they do in board games. Apparently, it was limited to 5,000 copies.
Right. I just dropped a link to the BGG page for it over into the Twitch channel in case people are curious.
So that's meant to be getting an independent outside of the video game release soon, I think. But I've been really enjoying that. It shows a lot of its influences fairly nakedly. It's like a dungeon crawling game with deck construction aspect as well.
Awesome. Their logo is absolutely stunning.
It's cool, isn't it?
Beautiful. Yeah. Okay. So going back to the Kickstarter, are there am excited to see this, and I'm wondering if you want to give me a soundbite that we can use as a quote. Like, what's your elevator pitch for this game? If you're selling it to someone standing in a convention floor, what is your elevator pitch?
So this is a unique historical game where you play Vikings trying to survive and get out of a tomb alive, having fallen into it by accident.
It is nicely done. Most people, when I do the give me your elevator pitch on the spot, they're like, I don't even know.
I'm glad that didn't show.
I think that it's interesting because seeing a lot of board games, right? I see a ton of things come through, and oftentimes I will see that there ends up being theme fatigue.
Yeah.
And I feel like this one, even if people are like, oh, Vikings, the fact that it was inspired by you actually standing in a place with a grounding in archaeology going, I'm sorry, they did what?
Yeah.
How did they do that? Is really interesting. When you started pondering the design, how did you go from these people are trapped and trying to dig their way out? You know, they're stuck in a snowstorm. They have no idea what the weather's doing outside. They don't know where they are or how they got there, really, right? They thought they were trying to get into a house, to cards on a board. What was that transition like?
Painful, frankly. The first rules for the first version of the game, actually, it was a dice game. And I sent it out to 3 different playtesters, God bless them. 2 of them came back and said, oh, yeah, no, this is all right, the way that most playtesters do. And the 3rd one, who has since gone on to become a game designer and developer professionally, he wrote back to me and said, you know, that this is awful. And
and you said, thank you, tell me more?
Well, yeah, my initial reaction wasn't, great, but I thought, no, you're right. And I'm glad somebody said that. So that was, put it away and think about it. And I can remember I was lying in bed trying to sleep one night, and that I suddenly thought, no, I'm going about this the wrong way. Go back to what you know almost. I said I played a lot of Patience growing up, and making it a card game instead of a dice game, suddenly the decisions felt right with it. And it wasn't just a plug and play, replace the dice with cards, but I could see the design space opening up around it for interacting with some of the other things I was already talking about in the game. It started out with that core idea of trying to get out of the tomb alive, and we talked about the plausibility, the likelihood of geese being the food element in it. So that was, right. I'd already been thinking on those lines of what are the things that could happen in these 3 days while you're trying to escape. So it was then meshing this core card mechanism together with these ideas of what could be happening. And that was sort of the breakthrough moment. But yeah, the first set of rules were awful.
And now there'll be collector's items at some point, right?
Yeah, that's it.
So you mentioned that the first iteration of the rules was inspired by a game design contest. Talk to me a little bit more about how that pushed you into design choices, or how it influenced what you did.
I think what it really did was create a deadline and pressures. And I work much better with external deadlines, as I think a lot of people do. And really, it was just sort of happy coincidence. When I was thinking about developing the game, when I started developing the game, I put a thread up on Board Game Geek saying, I'm doing this in a thread in the Board Game Design Guild, I think. And I put a thread up just saying, I'm doing this. Would anybody be willing to offer me some playtest feedback? Which is how I got those first 3 people to respond to me. But around about that time, I saw a post somewhere in Board Game Geek for the upcoming solo print and play contest, which had a rule in there saying you can't have published anything about the game previously. So I quickly messaged them and said, look, this is where I'm at. It's really early stage. I've had one thread. There's no rules posted publicly or anything. Just this is all that's happened. And they said, yeah, okay, that's fine. Just don't do any more until the contest starts. So once that did, that then provided an environment with lots of people subscribing to the contest and participating, reading rules of the games, offering feedback on the rules, play testing the games. And it was a great environment there for developing games. And that's it's an annual contest on Board Game Geek that happens every summer, the Solo Print and Play contest. And it's a fantastic little community almost, with some people there year after year developing new games. And
that's really cool.
There's been an increasing number of games as well that have been published coming out of that. Black Sonata is one, Orchard was another.
And do you plan on participating this year?
If I can, I said to you, I'm sort of working on one other small game. If I can get that for myself in a reasonable state by May, June, then yeah, I might put that in, because it is a great atmosphere to be participating in that.
How much did the community feedback end up shaping what you did? I mean, other than the "it sucks, it's terrible, go try again," like the smaller scale stuff.
The smaller scale stuff was that shaped it a lot, and it's difficult for me to talk about that in detail now, because it was the summer of 2016. It was quite a long time ago now. But the threads are probably they almost certainly are still out there on Board Game Geek. People can go back and look at them, and I think the feedback did create iterations on that first rule set for the first game. As it was refined.
So you'd mentioned that playtesting a solo game is a little different. If somebody has a solo game that they're looking to playtest, how do you recommend they get started? How do you suggest, how did you playtest this as it grew?
So the advantage of a solo game is that you can post print and play files online and a rule set online, and you can get blind playtest feedback from anyone in the world. And that
we're going to switch to unguided playtests.
Yeah.
We're Double Exposure is trying to shift our language from blind playtest to unguided playtest to be slightly less ableist.
I'll try and take that on board. My mother-in-law is registered sight impaired.
So unguided playtesting is easier when you only need one player.
Okay. Yes, that's absolutely. So that's a big advantage for solo games. But the disadvantage is that the sort of intangible feedback that you might get. So if you're stood at a table observing 4 players play your game, there's a disadvantage that they might not read the rules and say to you, "Oh, what do I do here?" Well, that's not really that helpful. They need to pretend you're not there. But it's very helpful that you can actually observe them and see where people are taking time, what decisions are causing problems, how much fun they're having doing certain things, as opposed to which things are making the game drag. And those are the things that are important for making the game good, that they might not report back to you in there. If you ask them to fill out a form of what did you like, what didn't you like, those sort of things aren't going to be in there.
Right.
So on the solo playtest side, exactly that. You can't witness those intangibles. You're reliant entirely on people's written feedback. So that there's plus points and less good points to it. That it's more accessible, more people can play test it, but you don't have that interaction of actually watching somebody play it.
I also wonder too if there's an element of not having someone to bounce it off of, right? If I'm playtesting something with a group, I can be like, okay, I'm like this thing, and everybody can go, oh yeah, let's talk about how to fix that thing. How do you replicate that when you're solo playtesting?
The solo play print and play contest that I mentioned is good for that, because it's a forum online where everybody's, everybody can see everybody else's feedback. So that's great for that. In a more sort of
a Discord or a Slack, even
exactly.
if they're not doing it on the forums. Interesting.
I mean, some of the when you're doing it by email, you lose some of that interaction between the playtesters, which is a shame. But that's the way to go about it, I think.
Interesting. So it's interesting to me because you mentioned, is it fun? And I can imagine someone looking at this theme and being like, wait, you're stuck underground, you're going mad, you have to eat a goose. Where's the fun? When you were imagining the player experience, where did you focus your, like, this is the part that's supposed to be fun or compelling or drive their enthusiasm?
I think fun can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, can't it? And I do remember
That's fair.
I do remember reading a report of the first version of Maeshowe on Board Game Geek, a session report, and somebody said that they really liked the game and it captured its theme really well, but that meant they had to be in a very particular mood to play it, which I thought was really interesting commentary. So yeah, that is the theme, and I think if that's a theme you struggle with, then perhaps it isn't the game for you. On the other hand, it is, we said earlier, it's not a simulation. We're not trying to do this accurately. So it depends how much, I suppose, you immerse yourself in games when you're playing them. And ultimately, if you win, then you've won, and that's a good thing, right? You see the light of day and the world is as it should be again. So anybody that sort of suffers from maybe negative emotions or an overactive imagination, then yeah, they might struggle with it a bit. I'm not going to shy away from that.
No, you know what? It actually, thematically, it reminds me a little bit of the Night Cage from Smirk and Dagger, which is about being stuck underground and having a candle and trying to get out and avoid monsters. And it's bleak and it's a horror game, but there's an element of the suspense and the drama of it is where the fun is. And it sounds like that's a lot of what's happening here.
That's right, yeah.
All right. What else would you like to tell our viewers while they're paying attention?
God, I hadn't been prepared for that. Other than go back the game now and yeah, obviously with upcoming games of Dragon Dawn Productions, we've got a lot planned for this year. We've got a couple of big expansions for Perdition's Mouth Abyssal Rift, which is the game probably most people will know from Dragon Dawn Productions if they know it at all. A card version of the same game as well is coming out, and then Singularity Sky that I mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of new games coming out from Dragon Dawn Productions this year hitting Kickstarter.
Sounds really busy. Thank goodness there's a lot of people involved, because that's a lot for one group to undertake.
Yeah, well, we used to do one game a year and then it became 2 games a year. So this year doing 4 is a big growth.
That's exciting. I just dropped the link to Dragon Dawn's Twitter feed over into our Twitch window. If people want to follow you as a designer, do they follow Dragon Dawn, or is there someplace else they can find you online?
Dragon Dawn's a good place to follow. I'm probably most active on Board Game Geek. Cornish Lee is my username there. So that's probably the best place to interact with me directly if people want to.
And I just dropped that over to the chat as well. All right. Lee, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time. I'm excited. I also grew up playing solitaire. And so something that I can pull out and have on the table and play a game in 15 minutes is really exciting. And I think that for people who are still being very cautious, having a game to look forward to that they know they can play with one person, 2 people, right? Yeah. Solo or cooperative with someone in the household is really exciting. And I think the art is beautiful. And I'm excited by the fact that it is a themed game that has a historical background and that you were so moved by an experience that you made a game. That's really cool.
Thanks.
All right.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Avonelle.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. Folks, you can catch us on Twitter at DexEnvoy, or you can find me at Avonelle.